turn it over.
Okay, thanks, Molly. Keep me on track if I.
Sure. I gave them the spiel that you're filling in, so they know.
That's great. Yeah, so I'm actually in DC today at a different event focused on federal values-based procurement. So looking at federal agencies shifting their procurement similarly to what good food purchasing policy does as well. But jumping in on the Illinois Food Justice Alliance, in partnership, so I'm Rodger Cooley, the executive director of the Chicago Food Policy Action Council, he, him. And in partnership with Illinois Stewardship Alliance and the Heal Food Alliance, Liz Stelk and Jose Oliva in particular, had been having conversations about the need for a coalition across the state of Illinois that focused on several different sectors. So ISA does an amazing job pulling together sustainable agriculture advocates and farmers and eaters. But there weren't folks who were bringing together food-related labor to the table. IEC does the Illinois Environmental Council does an awesome job on environmental-focused issues around around the food system. And then there are other folks who are disconnected, or groups who do an amazing job with public health and food issues, like the Illinois Public Health Institute and other allies there. But there was not a cohesive group coming together to talk through how can we have a collective policy agenda and build up enough political power across those sectors to come together long-term to really move the needle on our broad issues together. And so we started those conversations in 2018, 2019. COVID got in the way a little bit. So finally getting going, hired Kiara Jackson, who was supposed to be presenting today, but is coming to the same event and her flight got delayed earlier. But excited for the work of the Illinois Food Justice Alliance. But the policy agenda we decided to start with was focusing on getting Illinois to pass a good food purchasing policy for the institutions that Illinois manages and controls and the food that they serve to their clients and communities. So really seeing that as an opportunity, similarly as we've done the Chicago Food Policy Action Council within Cook County and the city of Chicago. So their institutions have been following this policy for the past 4 or 5 years. And this really creates an opportunity to help have the state use their money for procurement to kind of put their money where their mouth is, somewhat literally, and using values-based procurement as the decision-making or how they're going to choose to purchase food moving forward. So moving away from lowest cost bids as the primary vehicle, starting to look at the 5 categories that good food purchasing includes, which means prioritizing local, sustainable, food that's produced fairly, so paying attention to labor conditions, paying attention to animal welfare standards and guidelines for food for livestock-based products, and then also paying attention to the health and quality of the food that's served in these public institutions as well. So the goal of this institution is to create this mandate for state agencies to start moving forward with this. So it'd be Veterans Affairs, judicial system, higher ed, programs through Health and Human Services, as well as different cafeterias that the state runs as well. So thinking about CMS, potentially even the cafeteria at the Capitol could fall under this guideline down the road. What it does do is it doesn't set a clear immediate percentage target. So what the good food purchasing policy does is say, we're going to do what's called a baseline assessment with an institution and look at what is their current purchasing and how does it meet the different standards now. We partner with an organization called the Center for Good Food Purchasing, who runs reports for all the institutions who have adopted GFPP across the country. And so they give a very 10-page report on how it looks, what the local percentage looks like, recommendations for how to make some substitutions for food from what they're purchasing already to a different purchaser or supplier. And the same with looking at the sustainability when it comes to the labor, doing an analysis of if any of the suppliers have clear OSHA violations. Are there clear workplace violations that they need to backfill or make substitutions to, find other vendors, or have the vendors make corrections, looking at the animal welfare guidelines and again, the public health standards as well. And then from that baseline assessment, the next contract and agreement, the institution and whoever they give their RFP to or contract to, they'll include it in their RFPs moving forward. And then in their review of RFPs, they would consider what the bidders say, how well they're going to do on the good food purchasing standards. And then they write it into their contracts to hold them accountable for what they've committed to doing. And then they'll run ongoing assessments to make sure the institution and their vendors are following through on their commitments. Is that good, Molly, so far? Okay.
Yeah, that's great. So, we can pause there to see if anybody has questions about that.
Yeah, that's kind of a lot there. Anything? Okay. But again, so what it does not do, it does not set a target percentage goal for local, which historically there have been some target goals based on that. And partly it's because every institution and contract is so different in what their price points are, what their menu items are, what budgets they have to work with. So it's a very flexible, it's a mandate, but saying you need to understand what you're doing now and how, and then commit to and make plans for doing better, and then holding the vendors accountable for making sure that you make those improvements over time. So part of it's also to make sure this isn't an unrealistic target, but it's something that we can methodically, consistently move forward with. You know, and thinking about some exciting opportunities about how to connect the local food investment grants or infrastructure grants, as like how could those grants help provide suppliers, producers to scale up to think about selling to larger institutions, including the state. And recognizing the state has facilities all over the state, not just in one region of the state. There's, you know, it's an opportunity that could be for producers everywhere. So the impact of when the legislation is passed is that, oh, and one other piece, a couple other things the legislation does do is, one, there's a task force that was launched. It took a couple of years to get launched, called the Good Food Task Force, Purchasing Task Force, which was intended to have state agencies have a learning curve before this was introduced. But it took a couple of years to get seated, and finally was seated in January, but wanting to keep that membership group going because it's in the internal state agencies who purchase food, as well as the Department of Ag and DCEO and IEPA, who are partners, you know, have some overlap with food. And then external partners like SITBAC, ISA, and some other partner organizations who can help provide, who represent the 5 different sectors, who can help partner with and provide some oversight to how this is getting implemented over time. So that task force was folded in to keep ongoing engagement and participation. We've seen that happen where we've baked that into the city and county GFPP program. So it's been really helpful to have that ongoing access to and advocacy with those agencies. So it's not them way in the distance doing things we don't have access to what's going on. So that'll keep going. And then the other piece is creating a fund to help support staff internal to the state who would be focused on this as well. And the fund would either be come from state allocations, annual budget allocations could be filled, but we also put in that federal grants could help cover the costs there, or private philanthropy. So all of those could help cover the costs of what it would take to implement, or the years-long implementation of what this work takes place. And so the impact when it gets passed will be a little bit slow. It takes a time for these things. Like I said, there's annual cycles for getting the baseline assessments. and then the ongoing work of getting contracts implemented. But what it can do is what we've really seen with the city and county agencies is it creates a policy priority that this is something that they need to do, that this is a priority that the legislature has said that our purchasing needs to start following these values, and is given legal basis when we've gotten pushback from departments and agencies like, well, we can't do this. Why would we do this? This is a pain in the ass. This is going to be too much. We've been able to reference back and said, no, there's a policy commitment to keep this moving forward. Even when it is hard, even when it is challenging, that there's a long-term commitment for moving it forward. What it also does is starts helping those agencies start seeing things that they've never had to see or think about before. They've never had to think about the conditions of the workers through the food system ever. They just buy what's affordable, lowest cost. As long as it meets certain specifications, they move forward. They've never had to think about that. So this immediately starts creating pressure on the folks that they're buying from if they have workplace violations. It has them starting to think about the quality of animal products because they've never had to think about that either. So where are we sourcing our chicken? Is it antibiotic free? Are we paying attention to the conditions? Are there concerns that the meat's coming from a CAFO or a different vendor? It allows them to start really thinking about the sustainability of what's being produced. So they start making substitutions, knowing that if you substitute beef for some plant-based products on a regular basis, that improves. There's very clear correlations to how much climate, greenhouse gases are emitted from any form of animal production. But it also means if they substitute some meat, they could substitute higher quality meat for the less meals that they serve. So there's a lot of interesting things they start thinking about that they've never thought about before when they start making tweaks, and then starting to even think about and look for local substitutions for products that may have been coming from a Cisco or a US Foods, a much larger distributor. They start realizing, okay, this policy means we have to start being a lot more creative about how we're looking from our purchasing. And then the benefit is our target is equitably providing new economic opportunities for producers to be able to leverage the food that's being served and purchased by our government entities on a daily basis. They're spending this money no matter what happens, and redirecting it to producers and processors and suppliers who come from our communities and are trying to feed our communities. Any questions?
Yeah, no, that's great, Rodger. I'm gonna pause there too, because I want to go back and just really hit on like why this is needed, because I think you touched on it, and you were starting to get into it a little bit more there at the end, which is, our state purchases millions of dollars, and your taxpayer dollars are used to purchase millions in food that goes to veterans' homes and schools and prisons and other state procurement government agencies. So your taxpayer dollars are already purchasing millions of dollars in food, and that food is being purchased on the lowest price bid right now. Generally there's no transparency in those contracts either. So there's no way to know, how much is already being purchased locally in the state. And a lot of those bids go to large out-of-state corporations, so that your taxpayer money is not necessarily being reinvested here with communities here in Illinois. The other problem is that when you base a bid on the lowest price, you're basically getting the cheapest food. And cheap food is not necessarily cheap. Like, it's cheap in that you're getting it you're getting it for a good price, but the actual price of that food is externalized onto labor, onto environment, onto all these other factors, and low wages and not quality sustainable meats, or it's externalized in the environment in the terms of like pollution. And so if you're only basing your price on cheap food, then you're externalizing that price. So what we're hoping to do with the good food purchasing policy that, I think Rodger's really touched on really great, is like, let's not make it the cheapest price food. Let's have it on all of these values. Let's make sure our taxpayer dollars are spending on the 5 values that Rodger hit on, which are fair, sustainable, healthy, humane. And what was the other one, Rodger? I always forget the last one.
Local economics, local
Local,
economies.
right.
Yeah.
So, and if we can do that, then we're gonna get the kinds of food that we want, and that money is gonna be hopefully reinvested in our local communities, and it's gonna make Illinois thrive. So, Rodger, can you tell us, like, what can a person in the audience, like the layperson, what will their benefit be when this bill is passed, or if this bill is passed?
Yeah. And one other benefit that you were highlighting, and this is a benefit for individuals on the call as well, is that right now, as Molly was highlighting, it's difficult to impossible to know what actually food is directly purchased by the agencies. So part of this work, part of the policy would pass is that they have to collect what they're serving, how much they're serving, what they're paying for, what they're serving, and as well as where it comes from. So down to the source, as far down the source as they can track it. And then making that publicly available. So you would know what foods are specifically being served and where they're purchased from. And so that would also give larger ongoing opportunities for direct advocacy and be like, hey, we know that this is a bad actor for this reason or that reason. Or we know that there's a substitution that's local that we could really look at providing the same opportunity. So it'd be a chance for producers to be like, okay, this is what I know what they're buying, the quantity that they're buying, and what they're paying for it. And how do we, start getting into the conversation about how do we get in that supply chain? Long term, again, it's a longer term process, but it's incredibly important. So the outcomes will take some time for the on the ground results to really show. But what it does do is help start shifting the culture of procurement in these departments and agencies to start thinking about and prioritizing purchasing from our producers in Illinois. And over time, really creating that market opportunity to come get connected to it. But looking at the whole list of logos here, these are all partners who can then also help be part of providing new opportunities for those producers and suppliers to get into the mix as well. And some of it is, again, around like programs like the LFIG grant, who can help groups scale up, and the kind of connected advocacy there. Really making sure programs like the LFPA has a rough start, but down the road becomes a vehicle for producers to start scaling up and selling into these kind of institutions. Connecting to other market opportunities like food as medicine programs and other emergent farm to food bank. They're all kind of on the same spectrum of starting producers to sell in the wholesale and moving into other institutions down the road. So really seeing this as part of a larger ecosystem and connectivity.
So, Rodger, I have a question from the audience. You mentioned that the Good Food Purchasing Policy was passed by the city of Chicago and Cook County. And how is it going there? Like, what impact have you seen since that policy was passed?
Yeah, so again, some of it's around the paying attention and menu shifts and really starting to look at their procurement and how they're shifting it. And it has started to translate into some local purchases. So Common Market, who just purchased local foods, has started making local Apple deliveries to the juvenile detention center in Cook County. They're making direct connections to early this morning to the jail as well and the hospital system. There's been several workshops with Midwest Foods, who's also another wholesaler who's really prioritizing local. I can connect you to some of our staff in particularly our equitable supply chain development manager. Oh, and some of the other things we've done is having buyer supplier mixers. So every 2 or 3 a year, where we've gotten the sellers, either processors or producers, in the same room with procurement officers from these different agencies and departments, and there have been some direct sales. So one that really kicked in last fall was Phoenix Bean, which is a local tofu producer in Chicago. And they've started selling directly to Chicago public schools. So they've really had an opportunity to be able to scale up their operations by selling more directly to the CPS as well.
Awesome. Okay, so we've covered, why this bill is important, what it's going to do when it passes. Can you tell us, Rodger, where the bill is at right now? Like what's happening with it in legislature?
Yeah, so it is in the.
And we should also say the bill number is 5052. I don't think we the name of the bill that's been introduced is 5052, the Good Food Purchasing Policy. Carry on.
Yes. And it's in government subcommittee of the House. I'm sorry, I don't have the exact title. So it's in at a hearing committee meeting this week up for the first committee vote at 2:00 or 3:00 on Wednesday.
Around there. Wednesday afternoon.
We'll share it. It's Wednesday afternoon. So, which we found out last Thursday that it was going to be in committee this Wednesday. So, good opportunity for quick reactions and getting the word out. So if folks could do witness slips and call their legislator to let them know that this is a priority. We're excited for this opportunity to move forward this year. We weren't sure that it would be, but that it's gotten put into a committee, it has a good chance. Just looked this morning, there are already 20 witness slips all in favor of the bill. So really being able to get that, to get to the next hurdle would be a great chance. And Molly's sharing the action alert right now.
Yes, so that if you fill that out, that's going to take you to a form that allows you to send a letter or an email to your lawmaker asking them to support and co-sponsor this bill. It takes about 2 minutes, really easy, quick action to take. For folks who don't know necessarily about, Rodger says in committee, the way that the legislative session works is that a bill's introduced and then it will be assigned to a committee. And the committees are on all kinds of different topics. And then that committee is made up a smaller group of lawmakers, and they will decide if the bill moves forward to the full House or the full Senate. So it has to get out of committee, through the smaller group of lawmakers before it moves on to be seen and voted on by the full House or Senate. And then once it's passes from one chamber to the next, then it goes through that process again. It'll go to a committee, and then it will go out to the full House or Senate. And then, if it passes both chambers, then it's passed. But that's just a little background if you're not familiar with the legislative process or what a committee hearing is. All right. Questions from the group? Any thoughts on how this works? All right, well, I really appreciate you all being here today and learning a little bit more about the Good Food Purchasing Policy. We hope you'll take action to support this bill. I think just for all of your knowledge, we're not sure if this bill, we're not sure if it's going to get passed this year. But we're hoping to get it as far as we possibly can and start having conversations with lawmakers and making sure that this is on their radar and start building that power to make sure that if it doesn't pass this year, it will get passed in subsequent years. So just laying some groundwork there for expectations. But yes, really anything you can do to help move that bill forward, we really appreciate. If you are wanting to learn more if you're hungry for more about what's cooking at the Capitol, we have a couple of other sessions coming up. Next week, we are going to be doing a session on the Local Food Infrastructure Grant Act. So you'll get to learn a little bit more about what that act does, what the grant program will support, how it's going to impact your community. We've already seen a lot of great projects get funded this year, and there are probably some going to be in your area. So it's a great grant program. We're hoping to share more about it and why it's going to make a difference to you. So that will be next week. I'm going to drop the link in the chat for that if you want to RSVP. Just 1 second. And then on the last week of March, we will have Catherine Bernstein here from the Illinois Public Health Institute. She is going to talk about the Healthy School Meals for All campaign, which is a really important campaign to fund school meals across the state. Make sure our kids have access to great quality school meals and that nobody goes hungry. So she'll be talking more about that campaign and what it's going to do. So I'm going to drop in the link for that one as well.
And again, thinking about how all these bills connect and are mutually supportive. So as there's more school meals being prepared, that's an opportunity, ideally, for farm to school opportunities for producers down the road as well. So just again, seeing how all of this work connects, that these aren't one-off bills, but it's kind of all coming together to really support a more holistic and fair and just food system for us in Illinois. So, again, well, and thanks ISA for this opportunity to do this. I know it's extra time and energy to put these on, so really appreciative of you guys doing this follow through. So thanks for having me today.
Thanks for joining us last minute, Rodger. I really appreciate you stepping in.
Great.
Thank you all for being here today. Really appreciate you. And stay in touch if you have more questions. I'm going to drop my email in the chat if you want to follow up about anything. And go have a great, delicious, healthy lunch. Bye, all.